So my name is Ondrej Koumal, Czech name, okay, that's why it sounds a little bit weird. It's my first time in Athens, but not actually the first time in Greece, but I must tell you that this morning reminded me a little bit the last time I was in Greece, which was on vacation with my daughter a few years back. She was maybe 10 years old or so, and we arrived at midnight or past midnight to the airport, and there was this never-ending line of people and no taxis, right? One taxi every 5 minutes. So I told my daughter, look, there's two options here. Either we can wait here for hours, or we walk from the airport to the hotel. Now we chose to walk, which is exactly what I did this morning. So I already have 6 kilometers in my feet this morning. So it seems every time I go to Greece, something happens. So for those of you who are online and do not know, there's a general strike here today. So I'm actually surprised to see so many faces here in the audience. I thought I would actually be here alone. So now to the subject at hand. I wanted to share with you the most recent data on the impact of the introduction of heated tobacco products on smoking prevalence. Now, most of you or many of you will know that in late 2014, Japan was the first country where Philip Morris International, the company I work for, introduced its IQOS heated tobacco products. Now we know already, as other researchers have shown, and actually one of them is sitting right here in the audience, that the introduction of heated tobacco products in Japan has coincided with rapid and unprecedented decline in cigarette sales. Now, when we looked at the data, and I extended this chart until the most recent full year, 2021, you see that this trend has continued, and you can see at the top, you can see the sales of combustible tobacco products, which are cigarettes and cigarillos in Japan, and at the bottom, the blue line, you see the sales of heated tobacco units, which are the consumables for heated tobacco products. Now, sales volumes can be a valuable tool to examine market trends, but they can be impacted by a variety of factors other than changes in tobacco prevalence, right? For example, it could be changes in the frequency of use. So in other words, consumers may increase or decrease their consumption, which may significantly impact sales volumes, but may not necessarily affect underlying prevalence. Another example is the illicit trade or cross-border sales. So we've seen it, for example, recently in the past 2 years with COVID impacts. In some countries, we saw the legal sales of tobacco products, which is essentially the chart that you see here in front of you, have increased by 30% or so, for example. Why? Because the borders were closed and illicit trade networks and cross-border shopping has been impacted. So it's not the only tool we should rely on. So what we did, we looked at whether the changes in the legal domestic sales can be also explained by the changes in tobacco use prevalence. We looked at two sources. One is the government-funded, the Ministry of Health and Labor and Welfare-funded National Health and Nutrition Survey, and we also have our own repeated cross-sectional studies that we conduct in Japan. Now let's start with the National Health and Nutrition Survey. Do not be scared, I'll walk you through this chart, okay? So the survey only measured prevalence of cigarette smoking until and including 2017. However, we know already from the chart that you surely remember from the previous slide that sales of heated tobacco products have already picked up significantly between 2015 and 2017. Now, the survey was only updated in 2018 to measure cigarette smoking separately from heated tobacco product use. So now we can actually dissect what exactly is happening in Japan in terms of prevalence of tobacco products, both cigarette smoking and heated tobacco products. So if we look at the most recent data from 2019, which is the very far right, we can see that 12% of adult population was only smoking cigarettes. This is the dark gray at the bottom. 1.1% were using both cigarettes and heated tobacco products. That's the thin bar above 12%, 1.1%, and 3.4% were using only heated tobacco products. Now, there's another 0.2% not shown on the chart who used other or undefined tobacco product. Now, we can see that prior to 2014, prior to the introduction of heated tobacco products, the prevalence of smoking was essentially flat. Since 2014, the prevalence of smoking declined from 19.6% to 13.1% in 2019. The 13.1% is composed of 12% of the population who were smoking only cigarettes, as well as 1.1% who were both smoking and using heated tobacco products. As you can see, we can also calculate that actually more than 3/4 of heated tobacco product users in Japan were not smoking cigarettes. Now, 2019, yes, it's pre-pandemic, but it's quite a long time ago now. The National Health and Nutrition Survey was not conducted in 2020 and 2021 due to COVID. Now, in our case, once the situation permitted, we actually did conduct our cross-sectional surveys in 2020 and 2021, and I'll show you the results in a second. Now, we've been doing the repeated cross-sectional surveys in Japan in the general adult population and in a sample of IQOS users since 2016. You can see the study design displayed on the screen, and I think the presentation will hopefully be available online, so you can look at the design later. So, since 2016, we collected data from 4 annual surveys. The survey results among the general adult population, which you can see on the screen, are in terms of trends very similar to the results from the National Health and Nutrition Survey. As you can see, the increased uptake of heated tobacco products, which is the bottom line in light blue, was accompanied by quite a significant decline in smoking prevalence, which is the middle, what appears to me as black line, and at the very top you see the overall tobacco prevalence. Now, these are people in the general adult population. Now, if we zoom in on IQOS users, we also conduct surveys in IQOS users. So this is the data from the cross-sectional surveys of IQOS users, and we can see how the patterns of use have evolved. So we can see that in 2016, 63.4% were exclusive IQOS users, 7.6% were using IQOS together with another non-combustible in Japan that's mostly other competitor brand heated tobacco products, and 28.4% were also smoking. Now you see how the transition has evolved. We see that in the last year, in year 4 of the survey, the frequency of IQOS use together with other non-combustible products, primarily competitor heated tobacco products, increased, but at the same time, actually the use of IQOS in combination with smoking has decreased from 28.4% in the first year to 19.5% in the last year. So essentially, what you see in this last bar on the right-hand side is 80.5% of IQOS users were not smoking. So this is very similar to the data from the government's National Health and Nutrition Survey. We can also look at another chart. This is from the most recent wave, so 2020, 2021. And we can examine who are the IQOS users in Japan in terms of their history of use. So we see that about 98% of them had some kind of history of smoking or tobacco use. Less than 2% initiated with use with IQOS, and about 5% were former smokers at the time of the initiation. Now, we also have similar data from the general population survey, where we see that 99.7% of IQOS users had a smoking history, and also the majority of them did not smoke at the time of the survey. So to recap, the prevalence data show that the overall tobacco use moderately declined following the introduction of heated tobacco products, but the share of tobacco users who smoke declined at an accelerated pace. At the same time, the prevalence of heated tobacco products increased. These trends indicate that heated tobacco products in Japan are successfully replacing cigarettes and have likely contributed to a decline in the prevalence of cigarette smoking. While the prevalence of cigarette smoking had plateaued at between 19 and 20% before 2015, the introduction and uptake of heated tobacco products coincided with an accelerated decrease in smoking prevalence to around 13% in 2019. The survey data also show that virtually all heated tobacco product users had a history of smoking, and after switching to heated tobacco products, most of them stopped smoking. And that is all I have for you for the time being. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you, and I would also like to thank two of my colleagues who have been instrumental, Karina Fischer, who I think speaks later today, and Steve Roullet, so I'd like to thank them as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity.